first of many Robert E. Nigro Education Foundation speaking series events. The Robert E. Nigro Education Foundation was renamed from the Leechburg Education Foundation in honor and memory of Mr. Robert E. Nigro, who was one of the founding members of the original Leechburg Education Foundation. He graduated from Leechburg in 1947, proceeded to earn his education degree from Geneva College, master's degree from Duquesne University in 1959, and superintendent certification from Clarion State University. Mr. Nigro worked for the Leechburg Area School District as an elementary teacher, elementary school principal, and superintendent from 1979 until he retired in 1990. He served on the Leechburg Area Board of School Directors and was one of the Leechburg Pool Board founders, as well as chairman of the Lenape Technical School Board. Here with us this evening are his two children, Mr. Mark Nigro and Mrs. Joni Oberdorf, retired and current elementary teachers from the district respectively. We would like to thank them and their families for joining us this evening. As the children are our future leaders and business owners, we as a foundation are striving to assist them in reaching their utmost potential. The advisory board's goal is to provide Leechburg students with the means to achieve their educational goals through grants, scholarships, mini grants for payment of post-secondary tuition, apprenticeships, journeyman's costs, and other related educational expenses through a cooperative effort with the Community Foundation of Westmoreland County and the Pittsburgh Foundation. The Community Foundation, the proceeds from the ticket sales this evening and donations and future fundraising efforts will be used to achieve our goals of supporting Leechburg students' post-secondary success. So, without further ado, we would like to introduce Eric Berkey, nephew of our guest speaker, to formally welcome Mr. Matt Berkey.
Good evening, everyone. Okay. I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight to support the Robert E. Nigro Education Foundation Scholarship Fund. And to kick off the series, I'd like to introduce my uncle and professional poker player, Matthew Berkey. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Matt and his accomplishments, both as a professional poker player and LHS alum. On the other hand, what many of you may not know is that Matt is my uncle, mentor, and most importantly, my best friend. In many ways, he's helped shape me into the person I am today. The biggest takeaway I've had from time spent with my uncle is emphasis on having a dream, as well as having the courage to chase that dream. Being able to look past the fear of failure and instead envision a path to success has provided me the tools necessary to develop said courage. Matt's success has solidified, in my eyes, hard work, and a fearless mindset, and what a fearless mindset can accomplish. Having my uncle as my best friend is surprisingly pretty great. One of my earliest memories is of him putting a bat in my hands and teaching me to swing. Unfortunately, he was stubborn in accepting that I wasn't going to be a lefty. Although baseball became more of a hobby than a passion, he was right there to encourage me to pursue my love of hockey. Quickly, he became my strength and conditioning coach, dietitian, and all around my biggest fan. I'm sure most of you came here tonight to hear about the ups and downs in the life of a pro poker player, but I hope instead a glimpse of the person I've grown to admire can be shown. So without further ado, my uncle and my very best friend, Matthew Berkey.
Oh, hot mic. Oh man, okay, so why am I here? I gotta tell you, I've never done any sort of public speaking, so this is like very foreign ground to me. I think the last time I actually did anything in front of an audience was here at LHS when I was 18 as a senior. Anyone familiar with like the tradition here knows that during homecoming, the court would do skits for the pep rally. And it was like a reversal of roles. The guys would dress up as girls, the cheerleaders would dress up as boys, and everybody would try to do something funny. So my bright idea was to make fun of our crosstown rivals, Apollo. My apologies to anybody who is going there right now, my nephew specifically. Our loving nickname for them was Scuzz. Yes, we were very mature at that age. And as you can see, we dressed up as Scuzz Busters. To make matters worse, I decided to really press my comfort zone and create a song called No Scuzz to the tune of No Scrubs. I don't remember any of the lyrics. I don't know what it was about other than making fun of them, but I do know that when it was all said and done, and the grand finale of our skit was one of my good friends, Andrew Wobieski, running away and me tackling him, the place was just going nuts. And while we were on the ground, I was just, kind of saying to him, like, do you hear that? Like, they're going crazy for us. We're going to win this thing. That was, a solidifying feeling where it was kind of okay to step out of my comfort zone and do things like this. So when I was asked to present this speech, I was a little conflicted. On one hand, Mr. LHS, I mean, all the cheers and adulations, it's like I had this envisionment of coming up here and giving this tremendously articulate speech where I just moved the crowd and everybody's brought the cheers. Then reality set in. It's like, I've never done this before. I don't really have much to say, and I'm not that interesting. So I kind of really had to mull it over before just giving them any sort of answer. But while considering, it reminded me of my granddad. And he was an extremely personable guy, a real man about town. Had no problem engaging people in conversation everywhere he went. As my grandma would lovingly refer to him, he was a very happy-go-lucky guy. Anywhere we were, he would often exchange smiles and conversation with people, with them breaking away, being happy that they had run into one another. He had perfected the flirty old man routine to a T. And the thing was on the surface, there was nothing really that impressive about him. He was, just a grandfather. I shouldn't dismiss it that way, but just looking at him, that you would never know like he was this great man. But his stories really defined who he was, and he was an amazing narrator. And that was something I always took away from him. Some of my best memories as a kid were just sitting on the porch, me being wide-eyed and listening, him being a few beers deep and feeling nostalgic. And upon thinking of that, it's like, I kind of got over the fact that, in my own mind, I didn't necessarily deserve this opportunity, and just thought the stories deserve some sort of voice. So I ultimately decided to take this opportunity to come back and kind of pay homage to all the people who have had an impact on my life, and kind of reflect upon how the community has helped shape me into the person that I am today. So I guess we can start at the beginning. Growing up, my sister and I were a part of a single-parent home. My parents split up when we were very young, and upon the divorce, we chose to go with my mother, who was really very unprepared to embark upon raising two kids on her own. She was in her late 20s and wasn't in any position to take care of herself, really, let alone two people. She had undiagnosed bipolar disorder at that point, and also had an increasing substance abuse problem that was only getting worse. But we were young, and our allegiance lied with my mother. So fortunately, we were blessed to have my grandparents, and they did everything that they could to ensure that we never wanted for anything. We were poor, but not in the sense of we didn't know where our next meal was coming from, but more in a fundamental sense. We didn't have basic things like cars. A lot of times we didn't have a phone. There were times where the cupboards were bare and we just had a few condiments and some canned goods. But my grandparents were always just a phone call away, and they ensured that we never actually went without. Now I know it would make sense to say like, well, why did we stay with my mom? And it was kind of one of those things where, everyone involved could see that my sister and I were generally happy. Despite not having much, we didn't yearn for much either. So we weren't looking to better our situation and get out from the death grips of poverty or anything like that. It was all we had known, and she was our mother. So we loved her dearly and didn't want it to go anywhere. And the hardest part about this really growing up was just the social climate of it all. As a kid, when you start to experience like getting out of your own comfort zone and understanding that there are people who have more than you, people who have less than you, things like that, it becomes this social hierarchy where you have to ensure that no one finds out. And that became quite the burden to bear. So, most of elementary and high school, well, early high school, I guess, was spent kind of hiding the skeletons in our closet. I would go the extra mile to put my clothes outside so they didn't stink like smoke. I would do my best to kind of hide the fact that we were wearing hand-me-downs and, basically do our damnedest to fit in with the crowd. Because as kids, it's like you don't want to necessarily stand out in any fashion, whether it's good or bad. You just kind of want to mull in. And, when it came to having good close friends, it was really hard to open up to anyone. So for the longest time, I thought that was very normal. Fortunately, there were a lot of other kids in our situation. And coming from a small town, like, you kind of band together and gradually, like, let a little bit out of your situation. We joke about it now. Jason and I talk about it all the time, but it was like payday as a kid whenever the food stamps would come in. And this is something that none of our friends knew about, of course. They just thought we were normal, but we joke about getting that book of 20s. And it was like going on a shopping spree. We'd get these food stamps, we'd go to the store, we'd buy as much junk food as we could handle, have a sleepover. And more importantly, it's like if you wanted a few baseball cards, you just go buy a 10-cent pack of gum, get 90 cents in return, and then do it all over again. So it's like, these are little things that, not everyone gets to experience, but I'm not in any way, shape, or form salty over it. It really helped shape who I became as a person. My grandma was a massive impact when it came to these things. One of the biggest bridges in the social climate as a kid is sports. And, of course, if it was just left up to my mom, there was just no way we would ever been able to do anything. No car, no money, anything like that. My grandma ensured that this was never the case. She always kept me in cleats. She always had a glove in my hand. She made sure that I made every single practice on time, no matter how difficult it was for her to get out of her schedule. She was my biggest fan. She was at every single game. She was there to root me on, and she never had any sort of like negative criticism to throw my way. It was always just, good job. I'm so proud to see you out there. And for a kid in my situation, that was completely invaluable. So I kind of already alluded to it. Growing up, I very quickly gravitated towards baseball, which in some manners is kind of ironic, because with this heavy burden as a kid walking around, keeping these secrets in the closet, if you will, it made my emotions very polarizing. I was very often at the highest highs and lowest lows. And baseball being a game of failure just really drew that out of me even more so. When I first began, the only experience that I had was playing catch with the ball off the wall that my granddad constantly encouraged me to do. So I was okay defensively, but I would strike out often. I felt miserable. I actually spent my entire 11-year-old season bunting, which ultimately came back to be a tremendous asset. It helped me develop hand-eye, and by the time I was 12, I was doing very well. I believe I led our team in home runs. And fast forward a little bit, that was when I was first introduced to Mr. Smell. He was the head coach of the Cardinals, and I was on the Phillies. And Gumby was one of my best friends. and we had this like healthy rivalry between us. And I remember I hit a home run off Gumby in the championship, and Mr. Smell immediately started referring to me as Crusher, which up until that point seemed ridiculous to me. I was like very unwilling to accept success. Moving forward to whenever I turned 14, Mr. Smell actually drafted me onto the Cubs. And at this point, baseball had become a major passion of mine. I had always had this idea that I didn't want to work a 9 to 5, but now I finally had a tangible thing to cling to and strive for. And some part of me thinks that he saw that in me. So I would bust my tail to do everything I could to get better, and he was always right there encouraging me, even if it wasn't with specific things to say or do, just more so just keep trying. When it came time for the season to start, I was just developing the opportunity to pitch. He was, very quickly ready to throw me on the mound. And more importantly, when my natural position at first base was occupied, he found a spot for me at third, which anybody who follows baseball knows it's ridiculous to have a left-handed player at third. I went on to make the All-Star team as a third baseman. And, that wasn't necessarily a testament to my ability, but more so his belief in me and the fact that I could rise to the challenge. And those challenges often became my kind of defining moments. Because up until that point, I allowed failure to be this plague that I tried to avoid. It was something I saw as very crippling and a reflection of embarrassment. But throwing me into these scenarios where there's no way anyone could expect me to succeed was kind of like a free roll challenge, where it's like I'm either going to do well and that would be great, or I don't succeed, but we build off of it. And that was kind of like my first glimpse into understanding that remaining a little more even keel and not being so polarizing with my persona was going to be an important asset moving forward. So being that baseball was my favorite sport, it's no surprise that shortly thereafter I kind of got into poker. I know the correlation isn't directly obvious, but poker very much is a game of variance and failure to some degree. The best in the world win maybe 60% of the time. So the edge that you create is pretty small, and your expectation is to be losing a high percentage of the time. So I welcomed the torture, I guess, to some level. And my granddad was very quick to caution me on the tales of the gambler. He would tell me stories about, bookies he knew growing up who broke people's legs and friends who had their fingers cut off, and just these horror stories that would scare any teenager straight away from gambling of sorts. But I was very black and white in my decision making at that age. I saw things as either morally correct or incorrect. And to this day, I still operate a lot under those guidelines. I've never drank, I've never smoked, I've never done a drug. All these things are just so blatantly, obviously bad to me. And in a lot of regards, gambling fell under that same umbrella. But when it came to a game of skill, if someone were to bet me if I could dunk a basketball or not, if I could, strike somebody out on 3 pitches or something like that, anything where I was in control and I knew that my success was dictated by my own ability, I didn't consider that gambling. In some weird rationalized way, it was just investing. And that was how I saw poker. Not because I knew the game that well, and not because I ultimately knew that was the case, but because that's what people said. I had watched the movie Rounders, and they made it blatantly clear that it's a game of skill, and it's the same people who are out there winning all the time. So that was my justification, and I really liked the game, and I was good at it. Would play once a month or so. Would have a sleepover, and we would all buy in early and just play until dawn. And it was very clear that 3 of us stood out amongst the rest. Myself, Brian LaManna, who actually still plays professionally and lives in Vegas with me, and Scott Moore were always the winners. No matter how many people came and went, it was always the 3 of us at the end. And I can't really explain why, what we knew back then. Maybe it was just an understanding of risk and a little bit of how the game worked. but whatever it was, we clearly had an edge. So when my grandfather was discouraging me from being interested in such shady ordeals, I guess, I was just arrogant enough and just old enough to kind of like throw down the gauntlet a little bit. So one day in particular, he was warning me of the pitfalls of gambling, and I told him, hey, it's a game of skill. I'm not going to lose. Like, I'm confident in my ability. I'll beat anyone that you throw my way. And I could just see that glimmer in his eye where I pushed the right button. So of course he calls our neighbor PJ, and you have to understand their dynamic. They're like Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. Just, you know, they have this like ongoing prank war. They're absolutely best friends, but when you hear them speak to one another, you almost couldn't tell. And he calls him up and he's like, hey, Greg, I got Burke over here telling me that poker is a game of skill and that he can't be beat. And I don't know what's being said on the other side of the phone, but I'm sure, you know, it's something along the lines of we'll show him what's what. So I brace myself for what I'm about to face. I know it's going to be a firing squad of them giving me a life lesson. Fortunately, I felt prepared. So I told my granddad to grab a wallet. I went and grabbed some chips and cards, and I bet them outside. Within an hour, I had every dollar in front of me. They're dead broke. PJ's belly laughing. My granddad's shaking his head, and he's just ready to fire another round. So, you know, eventually, it was all said and done. I collected my winnings, and I impressed the two men in the world that mattered most to me. And it was kind of like it was kind of like their way of like saying that they trust me implicitly, and that I could follow whatever it was that I wanted to follow. And at the time, it wasn't poker, it was baseball. But that was very important for me because, you know, it's a long shot. And even though I believed that it was going to happen for sure, I knew the odds were stacked against me. So from that point on, like, I finally like actually started to do well in baseball in high school. I kind of fought through my freshman and sophomore year where I didn't get much time. But things started to go my way junior. Senior year, I actually started to pitch very well, which was never the route I expected to take. I always thought that I'd play a position. I wasn't really heavily recruited, but I was in contact with a lot of schools. And because I had reasonable academic success, I pretty much had my pick. So by the time May rolled around, I still hadn't chosen a college. And at that point, I just kind of shrugged and said, okay. One of my best friends, Maria Vieta, was going to Allegheny. I knew that they were a great academic school and that they just finished 4th in the College World Series. So I said, hey, I got in, I may as well just go. So I showed up to Allegheny, sight unseen. But in the process, I was miserable. I fell right back into my old Eeyore ways, where I was just hanging my head and counting the cracks in the sidewalk. And for me, it was just like, it was really difficult to deal with that change. I felt like I'd worked so hard to get up until this point, and now all of a sudden, like, the rug was pulled out and I had to start all over again. I know that freshmen don't really play, and I hadn't sat the bench in years. So when you take away both my social group and the one thing that I rely on most as an outlet, it became very challenging for me to accept that like high school was over and I had to move on. Fortunately for me, the Vietos were like a second family to me. You know, Big Russ was right there to give me a kick, tell me to pick my head up and just accomplish whatever it was I needed to do. So they packed my stuff, helped me move up there, and sent me on my way. And it was a tough go of things to begin with. I was a freshman who didn't drink. I didn't necessarily have a spot on the team. I still had to try out, so it was a ton of pressure right away. Fortunately, you know, I made the squad, and I was able to bridge that gap of not drinking socially with poker. A lot of the older guys played, and none of the freshmen really knew how. It's definitely something that's like, at that time anyway, it was more learned in college than in high school. So I had a huge leg up against other kids my age. I would often spend Thursdays and Friday nights with all upperclassmen in the baseball house playing games. So, you know, it made my freshman year and the transition a lot easier. I made a lot of new friends who were older than me that I could look up to and kind of like hold my hand through the whole process much easier. I didn't get any playing time, and I had a lot of rude awakenings. Just to get into, just to even have a shot to try out, we had to run a mile in under 8 minutes, which, I'm not certain if anybody can gauge that or not, but you could walk a mile in 8 minutes pretty comfortably, I'm fairly certain. We had to run our 60-yard dash in under 7.5 seconds, which is somewhat fast, but an NFL lineman could do it without breaking a sweat, for sure. I ran the mile in 8:45, and my 60-yard dash was about 8.5 seconds. So, needless to say, I had work to do. I spent the first week of school just like trying to break these minimal times, and finally got in. And upon not getting any playing time, I started to comprehend like what hard work really was and what was necessary. In high school, you kind of just fell back on your laurels and just displayed your talent. But here in college, all these kids were doing the same thing. So it became clear to me that something needed to be done to separate myself from the group. So I spent all summer just killing it. A few of my good friends played college football. They would be running their wind sprints up the field. I'd join them every day. Came back into fall tryouts again my sophomore year, and we were told right away that there'd be heavy cuts because the coach had a really fantastic recruiting class coming through, which didn't concern me at all. We had lost 4 pitchers, one of which being our only left-handed reliever, or actually the only lefty on the staff. And I knew I was prepared. I really put the work in. So we go through tryouts. I actually face the heart of our lineup 2 days in a row, and I believe I struck out like 5 out of 6 batters and just had like the performance of my life up until that point. The following day, we were all called in individually, one by one, to the coach's office. And the second I stepped through the door, I just kind of knew. Everybody had this somber look on their face. It was my head coach, pitching coach, and one of the captains. And they just said, why don't you take a seat? And from that point on, I kind of went numb. I'm sure they explained why they were cutting me. Somewhere along the lines, they said I didn't work hard enough. And I kind of just tuned it all out, said thank you, and walked away. I immediately darted back to my dorm room and fired off emails to every coach that I'd ever spoken to in my life. South Carolina, North Carolina, whatever, it didn't matter to me. And unfortunately, because we were already into the fall season, they were operating their cuts at the moment too, none of them could guarantee me anything, which I didn't care that much about being guaranteed a spot. I just fell back into that fear of failing again. And I didn't want to go to North Carolina only to not play baseball. That was like the worst case scenario to me. Fortunately, there was a new head coach at Gannon, and he was looking to rebuild the team. So when I spoke with him, he said, make the trip up North 79, and we'll see what we can do for you. So I immediately went to Gannon, had a tour of the campus, which again, I didn't care one bit about. I only wanted to play ball. I was there for one thing. And ended up working out lightly with the pitchers and then threw for the pitching coach. And I mean, 3 pitches in, he was basically saying like, you got a spot, that's it. So I immediately rushed back to Allegheny, and I had to get a release form from my current head coach, which he cut me, so you would think that would be no issue. When I went up to him and asked him for the release, he asked me like what schools I was looking to go to. And I told him that I was leaning towards Gannon, but I had emails out to Slippery Rock and a few other schools. And he just said, those are D2 schools. Don't you think you should set your sights on something a little more reasonable? And I said, just please grant me my release. Don't concern yourself with how I move forward. I'll be just fine. And at this point, I kind of like started to understand what it's like to empower myself and operate on my own. Up until that point, I really relied on the Mr. Smells and my grandparents and the Viettos of the world to give me that kick and push in the right direction when things went wrong. And at this point, I just really started to understand that like failure was a starting point, not an end. And if I was going to accomplish any of this stuff, it was going to be because I stuck to it and I did all the work necessary. So I then went to Gannon. I showed up a week before school got back into session, like right after New Year's Eve. met the little bit of the team that hung around that was from Erie or whatever the case may be, and immediately just got to work. I was in the gym all day, every day. First one there, last a week. I was throwing as much as I could. I was picking everyone's brain. And I mean, anybody who knows me growing up, I was so shy. This was way out of the norm for me. But I realized like we have all these things to utilize, and it's foolish for me not to take advantage. So I'm in there every day with the athletic trainer. I'm in there every day with the coaches. And it's not to be, it's not to butter them up or to be a teacher's pet. It was literally because I just wanted to know what it was going to take to earn a starting role, and then from there, what it was going to take to make the next level. By the time the team showed back up, I had already kind of solidified myself as a hard worker. We had a meeting, and the coach just said, write down your goals. It's important to set something tangible. And I remember the only thing I wrote was start against and beat Allegheny. They were our first game of the season after our trip to Georgia. So I wrote down one goal, turned it in, that was that. We got back to work until spring break. So just prior to leaving for Savannah for our spring trip, Coach calls me in the office and he says two things. He goes, first of all, I just want to let you know that when you were transferring here, I spoke with your old coach, Ferris, and he basically described you as a cancer to the team, somebody who never knew what work was and had never done anything before in their life, a goof off, et cetera, et cetera. He's like, I don't know where he assessed that from, but you've been nothing but the opposite here. I want to let you know that you've gotten enough votes for captaincy, but I can't give you that position on this team, having only been here for a few weeks. So, of course, at this point, I'm just blown away. Like, I'm so happy to see some sort of return, and anything he says from this point forward is just going to be icing on the cake. He then tells me that I'm going to be first reliever coming out of the pen when we go to Georgia, and that I may get some spot starts here throughout the season. So I'm like, great, this is the best thing I could have. I was a redshirt freshman. I had 3 more years to look forward to becoming one of the conference starters, and I was ready to get to work. A few days after that, I had gotten a phone call from my grandmother. I was just getting ready to take my final midterm before putting in a few more practices and leaving for Georgia, and she tells me that I need to rush home because my granddad's probably not going to make it through the night. Now, I knew that he was sick. He told, junior year, he fell stricken with bone marrow cancer, but he was extremely protective of me and never really let me in on just how sick he was. So I knew that I thought I knew it was cancer, I guess, at the time, but I wasn't sure. And he just kept telling me it was an anemia, which I knew to be pretty common and not life-threatening. And it was to the point where during the summer, I would take him to his chemo treatments, and he would make me wait in the car, and I didn't know that's where I was. He would come back 3 hours later, and he would tell me that it was just a long wait. And honestly, I didn't put this together until a year ago when I took my grandma to the same place. And it's like, it all started to flood back of like, wow, he was really pulling the wool over my eyes. And I could see the steady decline. I knew that he was getting sicker, but he would just continually tell me like, don't worry about it, everything's gonna be fine, just get back to school, take care of everything. And I had just spoken to him days earlier, talking to him about the meeting with the coaches. He had told me he was readmitted with a touch of pneumonia, but that everything would be fine. They didn't see me at Easter. So to get this call from my grandma just floored me. I immediately jumped in the car, sped down 79 as fast as I could to get to Pittsburgh. By the time I got there, it wasn't too late, but he was verbally unresponsive. He was pretty full of morphine and, for all intent and purposes, not really there. I had a few minutes alone with him where I said my piece and he was able to squeeze my hand, and that was like extremely relieving for me. He passed later that night, and now I was staring another roadblock in the face. Naturally, anyone would excuse me away from the team, give me a chance to catch up with my grandparents. I had 10 days coming up off of school anyway. It just seemed like the right thing to do. But my family and friends kind of understood how awful that would be for me, I think. And they were all very encouraging to get back up to Gannon as fast as I possibly could and go to Georgia with the team. And to be quite honest, it really helped the whole healing process. I don't think I could have just sat in a room for 10 days alone with my thoughts, doing nothing active, and not get angry at him for not cluing me in more, not being able to spend a little bit more time with him. But being able to go back and further pursue something that I've worked so hard for, it kind of like felt reflective of something he would want me to do anyway. So I went back up to Gannon. Heavy heart in hand, we drove to to Georgia, and I did really well. Upon coming back, I had another meeting with the coach. It was the night before our first non-conference game against Allegheny, and I walk in, and before I can even take a seat, he just flips me a ball. Says, "You want it? You got it." And I gotta tell you, as nervous as I was grabbing the mic here tonight, pales in comparison. I was so flustered. I don't think I threw a strike in the bullpen. I came out and walked the bases loaded, only to strike out the side. And the next 6 innings were much more of that. 3 times my pitching coach had to come out and say, "I want to leave you in, I do, but your pitch count is so high that I don't know what's going to happen if you don't start getting people out sooner." After the 6th, we were winning 6-2. I had, I believe, only given up 2 or 3 hits, and I don't even know that the runs were earned, but my pitch count was in the 120s. So, he reluctantly pulls me. I'm almost relieved at this point. And we ultimately go on to lose the game at 9, but I didn't care. It meant nothing to me. I was just so happy to have, kind of shown Coach Ferris that, he made a tremendous mistake, and that this was just the starting point for me. And all of that was very solidified when we went through the handshake line, and I purposely was last, and he purposely ducked out. So I actually hung around on the Allegheny campus thereafter, met up with a few of the upperclassmen I used to play cards with, and they were just wishing me well, telling me how good I looked out there, and that Ferris made a big mistake. And it was a really big pat on the back, I guess, for me, but more so like an eye-opening experience where I could start to accept success. And moving forward, that was just really important. That's when I really started to take college, I guess, by the reins. The next 4 years, I started to look at college differently. It wasn't like high school where you just show up, learn, go to practice, play, etc. I started to understand what real work was, and more importantly, how incredibly precious time was. So I treated college as much like a business as I possibly could, even though I didn't necessarily understand what that meant. I was spending 4 to 6 hours a day at the gym, and when you work in class with that becomes very difficult. So after my first spring semester there, I noticed how lenient the professors were with allowing me not to be in class. And I did really well that way. I was very good at self-teaching versus sitting through a boring lecture that I would ultimately sleep through anyway. So moving into my sophomore year, I made a very good point to just show up on day 1 of the class and stay afterwards. And I would go up to each professor and say, "I understand that you have an attendance policy, and I know it's very important, but I'm a student athlete and I have big aspirations of following through on the baseball side of things. I promise you that I'll be one of your best students, but I'm not going to be in class." And they all took it the exact same way. They said, "Hey, I have this attendance policy. I'm going to dock you 10 to 15 points each time you don't show, and it's going to be really tough to pass my class if you're not here." And I said, "That's fine. As long as you're willing to open your door to me on office hours, I promise you I'll have every assignment in on time, and I'll be here for midterms and finals." And we kind of left it at that. And I aced through my sophomore year like that. And being in the computer science department, you end up with many of the same professors moving forward. So moving into spring of my sophomore year, I had a lot of the same repeat professors, and they just kind of smiled and understood the arrangement that we had. I spent literally no time in class, but that doesn't mean that I didn't spend time being a student. I just took it, I shouldered the load as much as I could myself, because I thought that that was what college was all about. I thought it was necessary to learn the intangibles rather than just be taught some sort of material that you plan on working with. And ultimately, I didn't want to do computer science anyway. I was just told I had to choose a major, and at the time it was very popular. I said, well, what's going to make me the most money? They said, you're good with math. Do computer science. I said, all right, sure, sign me up. So, my takeaway from college was a lot more of the intangibles. I started to understand like the social climate and how to separate yourself from the group and really own who you are. And more importantly, like I said, being a little bit different socially, where I'm not boozing at parties, but I'm going anyway and having a good time. People really appreciate that. They respect the fact that you don't make yourself an outsider just because you don't partake in the same activities. Here I am again, coming up upon graduation and trying not to let myself fall back into my old Eeyore ways, because I just had the best time of my life. And now it's becoming ever more apparent that my baseball career is coming to an immediate halt. In high school, that was tough for me to swallow, but I was pretty sure I could play college ball. Now it's becoming an impossible pill for me to take. And I don't feel qualified for anything. I'd never punched the clock. My only employer was PJ, and I spent more time destroying his equipment than I did actually getting anything done. I was overpriced and underworked. It was a real American dream. So here I was facing a fork in the road of heading down this traditional path of doing computer science for a living, or trying to blaze my own trail and explore this whole poker thing. And at the time, I couldn't really qualify it, but I was beginning to understand like what the rat race was and how uninvolved with it I wanted to be. It kind of, I've actually just stumbled upon this type of information while doing a little bit of research for the speech, but it led me down Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what his hierarchy of needs say is that we have these fundamental needs, and then we have these upper level needs that enlighten us. And the fundamental needs effectively create the rat race. It's physiological, safety, love and belonging and esteem. And in layman terms, that's just food and clothing, shelter, a feeling and sense of belonging, and being happy with the person that you are. And to me, I kind of understood that you can go one of two paths. You can spend your life trying to exhaust these fundamental needs and continually replenish them and just live for that, basically. Or you can be a little bit more selfish and try to live for yourself. The traditional path of graduating, getting your education, going out into the career field, getting married, having kids, retiring, and then trying to start life at 65 just never really appealed to me. It was a very risk-averse lifestyle, and it basically puts the basic needs in a focus. Also, it lists your priorities in order of necessary to unnecessary, where you put family first, you put career second, and go right down the line for whatever time you have left. And I kind of never saw things that way. I felt like everything was a priority. If you were going to be happy, you needed some semblance of balance. And I didn't want to feel selfish because today I felt like baseball was a priority. And I didn't necessarily feel selfless because in this particular moment I felt like my family was a priority. This kind of goes back to when my granddad passed. In the list of priorities, if you're doing it in a linear fashion, there's just no way I should ever do anything but stay back. But it's just like, in order for everyone to be happy, we have to have this sense of like self-sufficiency. So the higher level needs in Maslow's hierarchy is self-actualizing. And he was quoted as saying, whatever a man can be, he must be. And this is very important because it puts much more emphasis on human potential. So rather than creating the ceiling or bar of success where we measure ourselves by what our job is, our family, our friends, our social groups, and things like this, the basic needs. Instead, we put an emphasis on what our maximum potential is and what kind of fingerprint we can leave on society. It's striving for peak experiences. So, rather than getting excited over having a vacation or things like that, we set the bar way higher, and we strive for creating a foundation or having some impact on the youth, whatever it is that will give you some sense of fulfillment moving forward. And that's not to say that down the traditional path you can't do these things also. Maslow's hierarchy is very fluid. Regardless of what path you choose, you can get to the state of self-actualizing and altruism. But it just becomes a lot easier when you don't put such an emphasis on food, clothing, and shelter. So the biggest thing with the self-actualization process is, rather than answering what it is that you want to do, how you're going to accomplish it, and just skipping altogether the why, you start with the why is it I want to do what I want to do. And that's a really tough question to ask yourself. It's a very easy question to just ignore and skip past and just kind of be of the worker bee mentality and just go for the tangible things. But when you can define the why, it really broadens the angles you can take with the how and the what. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with David Foster Wallace. He was a fantastic writer, and he did a commencement speech in 2005 that went viral a few years ago called "This Is Water." And I would love to just be able to explain this to you as eloquently and as articulately as he does, but I'm just going to show the clip. It's a brief 9-minute clip of the commencement speech that he does, and it really touches upon what it is to get out of this default lifestyle and move on to a self-actualizing mentality.
There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" The point of the fish story is merely that the most obvious, important realities are often the ones that are hardest to see and talk about. Stated as an English sentence, of course, this is just a banal platitude. But the fact is that in the day-to-day trenches of adult existence, banal platitudes can have a life or death importance. The plain fact is that you graduating seniors do not yet have any clue what day in, day out really means. There happen to be whole, large parts of adult American life that nobody talks about in commencement speeches. One such part involves boredom, routine, and petty frustration. The parents and older folks here will know all too well what I'm talking about. By way of example, let's say it's an average adult day, and you get up in the morning, go to your challenging white-collar college graduate job, and you work hard for 8 or 10 hours, and at the end of the day you're tired and somewhat stressed, and all you want is to go home and have a good supper and maybe unwind for an hour and then hit the sack early, because of course you have to get up the next day and do it all again. Then you remember there's no food at home. You haven't had time to shop this week because of your challenging job. And so now, after work, you have to get in your car and drive to the supermarket. It's the end of a work day, and the traffic is apt to be very bad. So getting to the store takes way longer than it should. And when you finally get there, the supermarket is very crowded, because of course it's the time of day when all the other people with jobs also try to squeeze in some grocery shopping. But you can't just get in and quickly out. You have to wander all over the huge, overlit store's confusing aisles to find the stuff you want. And you have to maneuver your junky cart through all these other tired, hurried people with carts, etc., cutting stuff out because it's full of ceremony. And eventually, You get all your supper supplies, except now it turns out there aren't enough checkout lanes open, even though it's the end of the day rush. So the checkout line is incredibly long, which is stupid and infuriating, but you can't take your frustration out on the frantic lady working the register, who is overworked at a job whose daily tedium and meaninglessness surpasses the imagination of any of us here at a prestigious college. But anyway, you finally get to the checkout line's front, you pay for your food, and get told to have a nice day in a voice that is the absolute voice of death. And then you have to take your creepy, flimsy plastic bags of groceries in your cart with the one crazy wheel that pulls maddeningly to the left, all the way out through the crowded, bumpy, littery parking lot, and then you have to drive all the way home through slow, heavy, SUV-intensive rush hour traffic, etc., etc. Everyone here has done this, of course, but it hasn't yet been part of you graduates' actual life routine, day after week, after month, after year. But it will be. And many more dreary, annoying, seemingly meaningless routines besides. But that is not the point. The point is that petty, frustrating crap like this is exactly where the work of choosing is going to come in. Because the traffic jams and crowded aisles and long checkout lines give me time to think. And if I don't make a conscious decision about how to think and what to pay attention to, I'm going to be pissed and miserable every time I have to shop. Because my natural default setting is the certainty that situations like this are really all about me. About my hungriness and my fatigue and my desire to just get home. And it's going to seem for all the world like everybody else is just in my way. And who are all these people in my way? And look at how repulsive most of them are, and how stupid and cow-like and dead-eyed and non-human they seem in the checkout line. Or at how annoying and rude it is that people are talking loudly on cell phones in the middle of the line. And look at how deeply, personally unfair this is. If I choose to think this way in the store and on the freeway, fine. Lots of us do. Except thinking this way tends to be so easy and automatic that it doesn't have to be a choice. It is my natural default setting. It's the automatic way that I experience the boring, frustrating, crowded parts of adult life when I'm operating on the automatic, unconscious belief that I am the center of the world and that my immediate needs and feelings are what should determine the world's priorities. The thing is that, of course, there are totally different ways to think about these kinds of situations. In this traffic, all these vehicles stuck and idling in my way, it's not impossible that some of these people in SUVs have been in horrible auto accidents in the past and now find driving so terrifying that their therapist has all but ordered them to get a huge, heavy SUV so they can feel safe enough to drive. Or I can choose to force myself to consider the likelihood that everyone else in the supermarket's checkout line is just as bored and frustrated as I am, and that some of these people probably have much harder, more tedious or painful lives than I do. Again, please don't think I'm giving you moral advice, or that I'm saying you're supposed to think this way, or that anyone expects you to just automatically do it, because it's hard. It takes will and effort, and if you are like me, some days you won't be able to do it, or you just flat out won't want to. But most days, if you're aware enough to give yourself a choice, you can choose to look differently at this fat, dead-eyed, over-made-up lady who just screamed at her kid in the checkout line. Maybe she's not usually like this. Maybe she's been up 3 straight nights holding the hand of her husband who's dying of bone cancer. Or maybe this very lady is the low-wage clerk at the motor vehicles department who just yesterday helped your spouse resolve a horrific, infuriating red tape problem through some small act of bureaucratic kindness. Of course, none of this is likely, but it's also not impossible. It just depends what you want to consider. If you're automatically sure that you know what reality is and who and what is really important, if you want to operate on your default setting, then you, like me, probably won't consider possibilities that aren't annoying and miserable. But if you really learn how to think, how to pay attention, then you will know you have other options. It will actually be within your power to experience a crowded, hot, slow, consumer hell-type situation as not only meaningful, but sacred, on fire with the same force that lit the stars. Love, fellowship, the mystical oneness of all things deep down. Not that that mystical stuff's necessarily true. The only thing that's capital T true is that you get to decide how you're going to try to see it. This, I submit, is the freedom of real education, of learning how to be well-adjusted. You get to consciously decide what has meaning and what doesn't. That is real freedom. That is being educated and understanding how to think. The alternative is unconsciousness, the default setting, the rat race, the constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing. I know that this stuff probably doesn't sound fun and breezy or grandly inspirational the way a commencement speech is supposed to sound. What it is, as far as I can see, is the capital T truth with a whole lot of rhetorical niceties stripped away. You are, of course, free to think of it whatever you wish. But please don't just dismiss it as some finger-wagging Dr. Laura sermon. None of this stuff is really about morality or religion or dogma or big fancy questions of life after death. The capital T truth is about life before death. It is about the real value of a real education, which has almost nothing to do with knowledge and everything to do with simple awareness. Awareness of what is so real and essential, so hidden in plain sight all around us all the time, that we have to keep reminding ourselves over and over, this is water. This is water.
So that's like one of my favorite things that I've ever watched, and that's only a 9-minute clip of it. It's actually like 27, 28 minutes long for the full thing. But the underlying point that he's trying to make is that, we all come with this default setting, and it's very easy to gravitate towards the negative and allow this cookie-cutter life path to dictate how we move through the world. But if we take the time to change our consciousness and be a little more aware of everything around us and to change that default setting in the way we think, we kind of remove those restraints and we gain this sort of independence and self-sufficiency. And when we remove dependencies like this, people just interact much better. Relationships have a lot more work put into them and last a lot longer. They're much more meaningful. We start living for all things that make us happy rather than necessities to get by day to day. This is all stuff that I put a lot of emphasis in now, but back then I had no way to understand that was very meaningful to me. But I did know that I didn't see things the way the structure of the traditional path did. So I had no interest in doing anything with computer science. And I was afforded this opportunity where I'm playing a game at age 22 and I'm making tens of thousands. I think my senior year, before graduating, I had already earned like $30,000 and had way more money than anyone else I knew my age, and was in no way, shape, or form prepared to do anything with it. I grew up poor. I thought this $30,000 would last me a lifetime. I remember the first time I had a big win. I had made $7,000, and I just kept it on me for days. It's ridiculous, but it was so intangible to me. Like I had to quantify it as like being real, and I had to hold it understand that you're good at this, and this is proof. So I took that small leap of faith. I had some close friends who were doing the same thing, and they just encouraged me to too. They all dropped out of school and were just playing, and they saw the fast money of it all, but I was a much more big picture kind of thinker, and of course you're just terrified right away. It's like, well, what if we fail? What if we go broke? Money's not easy to come by. I know what it's like being poor. I don't ever want to do it again. And their point was just like, who cares? And it was very well received on me because they're right. It's like, this is what you got a degree for, to take a big chance. And if you fail, you have all this to fall back on. So in order to justify it in my mind, I had to keep trying to make it in baseball. So I would travel the East Coast, Northeast, Midwest to all these tryouts, and almost every city had a casino. So I'd make a 2-day trip of it, and I would go try out, and then I'd go play cards. And after about 3 months of this, I had a lot of no's and a lot more money in my pocket. So push came to shove, the summer came and went, I didn't get signed to any teams, and I just said, all right, I guess this is it. So, unconsciously, I set down a road where I was going to have to carve my own path. There weren't successful professional poker players out there willingly giving away the secrets on how to do this as a life. I mean, there was only a handful that were even doing it to this point. The game had been popularized by TV for maybe 3 years at this point. So I was learning as I went, and it was a very difficult, expensive learning experience. Fortunately, back then, people were generally pretty bad at the game, and I was naturally pretty good, which sent me right back into my high school mindset of not understanding that I need to work. So I would just show up, I would play, I would win, I would move on. And that formula worked for quite some time. It all culminated in 2007, I had my first big tournament score, and all of a sudden, it was October, and I had $60,000 to my name. Never had that kind of money before in my life, and was very unprepared for it. I was happy. I'm living in Erie, paying $200 a month for my college apartment still, and I could live off this forever. I was a millionaire as far as I was concerned. Then reality set in, and so did my inexperience. One night I decided to just play really high stakes online in games that I was very unprepared for against players that were much better than me. I lost $40,000. And it immediately hit me that like, hey, this can happen. This is real. And so my next step was to drift back into that traditional mindset that we grew up with. And so I immediately sent $5,000 to my student loans, like having to justify that I wasn't going to walk away with this without doing something with the money. So now here I am, coming up on the first of the year, and I'm gravitating much closer to broke. Fortunately, there were still like pretty good games. And one of them was a game in Pittsburgh that I had been traveling to for the better part of a year. I would drive 2 hours each way. I would drive from Erie to there, play till 6 a.m. and then drive right back up. And I kid you not, this is the most stereotypical game you could ever imagine, but it was in the basement of a restaurant, run by a guy named Mike the Greek, where there were at least 5 bookies at the table at any given time and a retired hitman. And it wasn't the most comfortable situation to be in, especially as a recent college grad where you're trying to legitimize the things that you do. But at the same time, these guys were just willingly giving me thousands of dollars. So it was kind of tough to pass on. In no way, shape, or form was I ever in danger. I know this because they had an armed guard at the door who would have killed anybody who tried to break in. But it didn't feel that way at the time. And one of the funniest stories that I have, but worst moments that I felt at the time, was I befriended one of the players in the game. He's a businessman who does like beverages for stadiums. Very wealthy, does very well for himself, and honest to God, the nicest guy I've ever come across. And we're playing in the game, and I have Mike the Greek to my left, and my friend Tony across the table. And a hand comes up where we get a lot of money involved, and I end up making a big call for thousands of dollars against Mike with like bottom pair, and he was bluffing. And when Tony sees the hands turned over, he's so shocked that I was able to play the hand this way that he immediately jumps out of his seat and exclaims, "Matt, you had to have seen his cards. Tell me you didn't see his cards. That's the greatest call of all time. Tell me you didn't see his cards." Mike, being Mike the Greek and not really interested in putting any sort of logical thought into this, immediately thinks I'm cheating. And now all of a sudden I think the armed guard is going to be my executioner. So my heart's racing, I'm sick, I'm thinking to myself like, I know you're not accusing me of cheating, like you're my friend, and I understood that he was trying to be complimentary, but needless to say I was never invited back to the game again, and collectively my group of friends and I decided it was time to move to Vegas. So we packed our things. Again, I'm facing this situation where I'm very comfortable and I don't want to go. And I was the last one on board for it. Everybody else was amped, but Vegas isn't exactly the kind of place I see myself. Like Pittsburgh's the type of city I want to be in. The hometown pride and the sports teams and the culture and the food and all that stuff. Where Vegas is transient. Everyone's there just to look out for themselves and earn and hustle. Finally, I gave in and decided to move. And by the time we paid for the expenses and I had, done a little inventory on my losses recently, I moved there effectively broke. I think I showed up with like $3,000 in my pocket and just absolutely terrified. But I put myself in this scenario so many times where I began to understand that like, I achieve when my back is against the wall. And again, like failing just wasn't gonna be that big of a deal. I'd figure my way out of it. I wasn't gonna go without food or shelter or clothing. So again, it was kind of like putting the basic needs aside and striving towards something greater. Within the first week there, I won a tournament for $30,000. So everything was well and good again. And I kind of hovered around there. I got very complacent for the next couple of years. I just pretty much enjoyed my mid-20s, and being in a new city, it was a culture shock to me. So I got involved with baseball out there. I joined the gym, started playing a lot of pickup basketball. Basically, I started to get involved in everything except for poker. And within a couple of years, I was broke again. And fortunately, my roommates have been doing extremely well. And they figured out much sooner that there was a lot of work involved in staying atop the game. One roommate in particular came from a teaching background. He had actually gotten his tenure in New York and left it to play professionally. He was doing the best of all of us. And he was the type of guy who, anytime I saw him, he would just be watching anyone he could play the game online and learning from it. So he offered to share action with me where he would invest in me and I would invest in myself, and we would split the profits. And I just started playing online diligently every single day. Poker all of a sudden became a job to me, something I was trying to avoid, but in this particular instance, it was a necessary evil. And all along, I was starting to understand how much theory is involved and how much you can actually help yourself by putting deep thought into the game. By the beginning of the following year, 2010, I culminated my 5 months playing, sharing action with Brent with a second place finish in a major tournament for $110,000. So we split that down the middle, and I was kind of ready to be on my own again. And this time I was armed with a little bit of a work ethic. So I busted my hump, I put the hours in on and off the felt, and I parlayed it into a 43rd place finish in the World Series main event that year. So that was worth $250,000. And now all of a sudden, I have money I can't fathom. I have no preparation for this. I haven't thought this far ahead. So I do what any kid my age would do, and I squander it. I moved out on my own for the first time at this point. I bought all new stuff, paid way too much for rent, actually got robbed one night in my sleep. Just everything that could go wrong did, and about a year and a half later, I found myself going broke again. I had a couple $1,000s to my name, and I learned a really tough business lesson, which we were just never really prepped for. We get thrown into this realm where the best way to operate as a professional poker player is to treat yourself as a small business. You have to be understanding your finances, your buy-ins, your wins, your losses, taxes, everything under the sun. It's all just very important to stay on top of. And then on top of it, you have to keep getting better at the game. And this is all stuff that I was very unaware of, but learned the hard way. So in the meantime, I had befriended a big jelly guy at the table, Mike Bertolini. You guys actually may know him from the movie Charlie Hustle. He was Pete Rose's right-hand man throughout the whole scandal time, and actually did jail time for Pete because he wouldn't turn him in. So they ended up getting Mike for tax evasion, which is just like some nonsense charge, pretty much because he wouldn't rat Pete out. they went their separate ways, but he then went on to manage Joe Montana, does work for Bill Parcells. He's just very heavily involved with people at the top of their game. And the way he got involved in all this is Mike was at the absolute top of sports memorabilia. He was the best of the best. He put on all these shows, he invited all these athletes, brushed elbows with them. He was just a great networker. So I'd been friends with him for a couple years, and he saw my ascent and fall. And we would talk often, and he would always reiterate it to me that I impressed him so much as a player. And it never really set in, but after spending like a year living month to month where I'm just trying to make a few $100s to pay rent and stuff like that, one day just prior to Christmas, he kind of just like called me and really laid it out for me. He's like, listen, I've been around greatness my entire life. I know what it looks like. It's like I've only dealt with people who are the absolute best at what they do. He's like, and I see that in you. And you need to do something about it because you're just going to fall by the wayside and be an afterthought. And I kind of understood a little bit more there. In that time leading up, I had started coaching other players, and that was how I was paying my rent. And he knew me well enough to know that I would never accept the handout. So he gives me this offer of, he's like, I've been playing this game for years, I'm not a winning player and I want to be. So like, I'm gonna give you $10,000 and you're gonna give me 100 hours of coaching. And I said, absolutely not. I'm your friend, I'll do it for free, like completely ridiculous. And he's like, I'm not taking a handout from you, so the check's in the mail and I'll see you Monday for our first lesson. So I graciously said thank you and really had no intention of taking the money. But he left me no choice. He ended up wiring the money directly to my bank account. And so I saw it as an opportunity. If this guy believes this much in me, then maybe there's something to it. So I, coincidentally enough, tore my ACL on my birthday a few days later and was pretty much just stricken to doing nothing but poker. Within a month, I had won a tournament for $30,000 and started doing really well in cash games again. I immediately tried to give Berto the money back, and he just wouldn't accept. All he could do is give me his gratitude for helping him out, which how ridiculous. He was so happy for me. So when the World Series came up that year, I couldn't wait to offer him a chance to invest into my tournament plays, which he did. He ended up putting it up 10% for all my tournaments, and I went on to make 3 final tables, culminating in $500,000. So here I am again. I've gone broke twice now from large sums of money that I couldn't fathom, but I feel much more equipped. I've taken as much away as I can from all these lessons. And sure enough, I'm presented another opportunity. A guy that I play cards with who, he actually owns the last private stock trading firm and is a 100 millionaire many times over, comes up to me and offers me a seat in a private game that he plays where the minimum buy-in is $100,000. Now, of course, I can't afford it. Because of that $500,000, I only got to keep a percentage. I have maybe $250,000 to my name, so there's no way I can just put half of it into one game. But I've really networked myself at this point, and I know there are a lot of people who would love a piece of the action. So I raised $2 million and put up half of my net worth, and just basically say, okay. Now, this is, again, from the outside looking in, completely insane. But at this point, risk and failure have completely become an afterthought to me. Not in the sense that I don't consider it, but in the sense of I don't fear it. I've stumbled upon a path where it's very necessary to risk in order to succeed. And I'm very confident that even if I fail, I'll gather myself and make it back on my feet. So one of the most common questions I'm asked is, you're young, you come into all this money, do you ever invest? And it's a really good question. and something I'm, as an adult, or as I grew into adulthood, was very unprepared for. I think back to like sociology class with Mr. Shoddy telling us, make your money work for you, don't work for your money. And in simplistic terms, it was invest in mutual funds, get a low yield savings account, buy real estate, all these things. But here we are in a climate where those things aren't good investments anymore, or at least aren't obviously good investments. I'm sure that if you're very knowledgeable in those areas, they're fantastic, but I'm not. But what I do know is poker. And getting to play in this big game and brushing elbows with these very successful men who are worth millions and millions of dollars, the first thing that I ask them is, what do you suggest I do, being very far removed from your level of success? And the answer is always the same across the board. It's invest in yourself, invest in things you know, people you believe in, friends and family. It's like that's where you're going to see your greatest return. That's the best way to make it. Find something you're passionate about and pursue. And so that's why I took the big game opportunity. And it's why I haven't thought twice about how much of myself I have at risk. And it's also why I'll never hesitate to do business with close friends who are also looking to get started at something that they're passionate at or foresee really working themselves out. So I hope to someday provide a fraction of the positive impact on my nephew as this community has impacted me with. Thank you all so much for extending me this awesome opportunity. I really appreciate it, more than you know. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to entertain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berkey. That was a very interesting presentation. I would like to thank this evening the Robert E. Education Foundation Advisory Board, our Vice President, Michelle Fox, our Treasurer, Teresa Ettinger, our Secretary, Danielle Rinke, Tracy Bartow, Pauline Bish, Jennifer Cominos, Ian Magnus, and David Tucson. Without these people, this evening would not have been a possibility. We appreciate Mr. Rob Reams for doing our lighting and our sound this evening, and the maintenance crew for helping set up for this evening. In closing, please accept our most genuine appreciation for attending. There are many future speaker series in the development phases, as well as other fundraising efforts through our foundation, so please stay tuned for those announcements. We hope to see you all there. Refreshments are available in the hallway right outside of the auditorium. Please help yourself. And if you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call 1-800-426-2537. Have a wonderful evening.
Harley sees her.